From his backyard shed in the Hudson Valley of New York, powered by the sun in the sky, ladies and gentlemen, your host, a freshly showered Pete Dominick. Yes, thank you, announcer who varies slightly on my own voice because it's me. I'm very happy that you are here for today's podcast because it's a hell of a program today. Two excellent guests. David Litz, former Obama speechwriter, author, New York Times bestseller, going to join me to talk about his amazing appearance on Newsmax, where he told them to stop lying so good. You've probably seen it by now. We talk about a lot more than just that, of course. Also, for the first time on the program, running for mayor of Buffalo, India Walton joins me, and I love her. Amazing conversation with India Walton, who I'm very excited to see hopefully be the next mayor of the great city of Buffalo, New York. I am Pete Dominick. This is Stand Up Daily, and it is powered by you. So if you haven't signed up for a subscription, I need you to. Please do sign up right now, patreon.com/Pete Dominick, or just click on the paid subscription link in the show notes. Also, give me a review on Apple Podcasts if you haven't already. That's the other really good thing that you can do. Hope to see you tomorrow night at our Stand Up with Pete Dominick community happy hour hangout, which is every Thursday at 8, and anytime on the Discord platform. You can hang out with other listeners, get to know each other, network, joke, talk about things, gain some perspective. A wonderful community that we are building each and every day. Welcome to new folks. Thank you very much for joining me. And at the top of every show, well, almost every show, I do a big old news segment recapping the day before. It's called The Last 24. Hit it, Keith. Oh, the big headlines are the violence in the Middle East. The Palestinians and Israelis are launching all kinds of munitions at each other. We'll get into that. Got some things to play for you there. Liz Cheney gave a defiant speech last night on the House floor. Over 1,000 gas stations have run out of gas. State of emergency in Virginia, and it's mostly because people are panicked buying. And the average daily COVID cases in the U.S. has fallen below 40,000. Just a couple headlines to get us started, and a whole bunch of clips that I want to play for you, as always. And this first series of clips is all COVID-related, and even this one, where the Chicago Blackhawks longtime announcer Pat Foley had to go on the broadcast and apologize for comments he had made the night before when he made an on-air suicide reference. Apparently, he said, I don't have the audio of the comment, but apparently he said, if I'd been traveling with the team this year, I might have put a bullet in my head. That was a comment that he made while discussing the strict COVID-19 protocols in place for road games. And his words immediately drew backlash, including from the Blackhawks themselves. And here is Chicago Blackhawks Pat Foley, the broadcast, the announcer, on air the next night apologizing. I got to play it for you.
And the puck escaped him just as he was crossing the line, so that will lead to a stoppage. Hey, partner, I need to throw something out here. When I was talking about complimenting the Blackhawks and the restrictions they had to deal with on the road, I made a comment about myself and how hard it would be for me to deal with all the restrictions. And I said, put a bullet in my head. I wish I didn't say that. I'm sorry if I offended some folks. Apparently I did. And so I apologize.
I don't know, man. I have a lot of thoughts about that. First of all, it's wildly inappropriate, but I don't know. Were hockey fans really offended by that? I mean, and I also want to talk with you guys about this at some point. I mean, this is a weird thing. Mental health issues, and you're not supposed to comment at all about suicide. I've been reprimanded for similar comments before, and you're supposed to even warn people before you talk about it because you could trigger them. And no, man, I guess I just want to see some more data. I need to have an expert on. I'm a little ignorant on that, and I think it's inappropriate for most people in most positions. Sometimes when joking around like, oh my God, I kill myself, like I don't have an issue with that. So maybe you can disabuse me of it. I have two very close relatives who have had a lot of suicidal tendencies. I've known people who have taken their life. I totally get it. I'm usually more sensitive, but for some reason I don't have a lot of sensitivity around people commenting or talking about it. And so I probably could use a course correction on that. I'm open to it. So that's one reason why I wanted to bring that up. Also, let's stick with some more COVID-related stuff. And speaking of things that make you really, really frustrated, not so frustrated and upset that you would want to end your life, but here is Senator Rand Paul questioning Dr. Fauci yesterday at a hearing, and this is really outraging. And this is just part of it, by the way.
Dr. Fauci, do you still support funding of the NIH funding of the lab in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, with all due respect, you are entirely and completely incorrect that the NIH has not ever and does not now fund gain of function research in the Wuhan Institute
Do they fund
of Virology.
Dr. Barrick?
We do not fund.
Do you fund Dr. Barrick's gain of function research?
Dr. Barrett does not doing gain of function research, and if it is, it's according to the guidelines, and it is being conducted in North Carolina. Not
you don't think inserting
in
a bat virus spike protein that he got from the Wuhan Institute into the SARS virus is gain of function?
That is
you would
not
be in the minority because at least 200 scientists have signed a statement from the Cambridge Working Group saying that it is gain of function.
Well, it is not. And if you look at the grant and you look at the progress reports, it is not gain of function, despite the fact that people tweet that.
So do you still support sending money to the Wuhan Virology Institute?
We do not send money now to Wuhan Virology
Do you support
Institute.
sending money? We did under your tutelage. We were sending it through EcoHealth. It was a sub-agency and a sub-grant. Do you support that the money from NIH that was going to the Wuhan Institute?
Let me explain to you why that was done. The SARS-CoV-1 originated in bats in China. It would have been irresponsible of us if we did not investigate the bat viruses and the serology to see who might have been infected.
Or perhaps it would be irresponsible
China.
to send it to the Chinese government that we may not be able to trust with this knowledge and with this incredibly dangerous viruses. Government scientists like yourself who favor gain of function research.
I don't favor gain of function research in China. You are saying things that are not correct.
You're saying things that are not correct. Rand Paul has got all kinds of twisted conspiracy theories and grains of truth that he throws out there to get whatever. He is just so close to the top asshole, if not for Ted Cruz. But this is getting scary, of course. You have Republican senators questioning the top scientists, and that's fine. There should be questions. Lots of questions should be asked. But insinuating conspiracies. Here's another idiot. This guy's name is Roger Marshall. Here he is at the same Senate hearing asking stupid questions and acting like he knows what he's talking about because he references one scientific term or another. And I just want somebody like Fauci or some other scientist to ask them some of the most basic scientific questions and just to prove how they have no idea what they're talking about, no understanding whatsoever of science or how it's conducted. Here's dumb Roger Marshall making a complete jackass of himself yesterday as well.
That someone made the decision. I think you led that decision, but we'll come back to that. Here's my last question. If COVID-19 is indeed a product of lab manipulation, can you sit here and unequivocally say the viral studies that NIH helped fund, could not be indirectly or directly related to this final COVID-19 virus?
Yeah, looking at these experiments that were done, that we funded, there would not be that possibility.
Unequivocally.
They are talking about a hybrid virus of a mouse virus that was adapted to a mouse, that anyone that knows anything about virology would realize that that is not something that would infect a human, much less be pathogenic and transmissible.
But we helped make the mouse that had the HLA receptor that this COVID-19 was specific for, and NIH was involved in the development of that humanized mouse?
Yes, but as I mentioned in response to Senator Paul, the NIH and NIAID did not fund gain-of-function research to be conducted at the Wuhan Institute of virology.
But that's not my question. The question is, could some of the funding you did, you can call it gain of function or not, developing the HLA receptor at the mouse, I'm not sure if you're going to call that gain of function or not, probably not. But could some of the funding indirectly ended up to the contribution of COVID-19?
I'm not sure exactly where that question is going. I mean, you could do research on something as benign as looking at something that has nothing to do with it, and it could indirectly someday somehow be involved. So if you want to trap me into saying yes or no, I'm not going to play that game.
But we need to look at that very, very deeply and consider exactly that's why you've committed earlier to sharing all the viral.
I'd be happy to share any information you would like with the committee.
Okay. Thank you so much. I yield back.
I think that's one of the important things here is that the scientists are not hiding anything. They're happy to share their data. It's not top secret, their research, and Dr. Fauci committing to that as well. And now I've got another clip to play for you from another great scientist who I know personally. I've been interviewing him for years, Peter Hotez, who I think is an absolute hero. You've got people like Tucker Carlson and Fox News and Peter Navarro, who is Trump's former trade czar, basically saying that Fauci is, quote, the father of the coronavirus, alleging that he created the pandemic. This is part of the playbook to take heroic people and demonize them because that works. And here is Dr. Peter Hotez, who has been one of those heroic people that's been demonized. The anti-vax movement has been attacking him and got his number and his email and has been threatening him. Here he is talking about it on MSNBC with Chris Hayes last night.
I think the difference between now and the last year or so compared to in the past is the increasing politicization and linking it to far right-wing extremist groups and kind of becoming mainstream across parts of the Republican Party. So the attacks coming to me from for the last week, what happened was a group that I didn't know that much about, but I looked it up, and they're identified as a far right-wing conspiracy theory kind of anti-vaccine group. Started telling their followers to contact me, providing my email and phone numbers. And so it's been a nonstop barrage of really pretty scary emails and, saying they're a group of armed patriots are going to hunt me down and that kind of stuff. And a lot of they love their Nazi imagery, lots of hangings at Nuremberg and that kind of stuff. So it's pretty unnerving, but we'll just have to keep on watching it. And, this is the nature of the anti-vaccine movement in this country. It's somehow married now to far right-wing extremism and white nationalist groups. And it was starting over the last couple of years, but it's gotten more intense and more expansive.
Oh, these anti-vax lunatics, I tweeted, aren't only ignorant, uninformed, and a danger to civilized society, but they specifically threaten heroes like Peter Hotez. And, his daughter is autistic. He wrote a whole book about it. He's dedicated his life to developing the miracles of science. And I'm just so upset about that. But we got you, Dr. Hotez. And Peter Hotez does have a great sense of humor about everything. I love the guy. I really do. He's so great. And he tweeted last night, he said, taking a walk in the neighborhood with Ann tonight and debating if we should be more concerned about the white nationalists stalking me or the tiger on the loose in Houston. Dr. Hotez, of course, lives in Texas, works at Baylor University. I tweeted him back asking him if he knew how the tiger felt about the 1619 Project or voting rights in America. And that's how you should evaluate that threat. Later on in that same interview last night, of course, Chris Hayes did ask Peter Hotez about the news that now 12 to 15-year-olds are available to be vaccinated as well. And here's what he had to say.
It's definitely good news. The 12 to 15-year-olds, with this B117 variant that's been around, we're starting to see younger people go into hospital. We're starting to see even teenagers go into hospital. So we need to get them vaccinated. And when that happens, if we can get high rates of vaccine coverage, it means middle schools, high schools are going to be very safe places for the students and for the vaccinated teachers and the staff. And then if we can get a high percentage of both the adolescents and the adults vaccinated, overall transmission is going to really dramatically decline. And that's going to make even the elementary school safe, even though the little kids are not vaccinated yet. So that's really good news. But again, I worry about this kind of red state, blue state divide. I don't want to see two countries, COVID positive and COVID negative.
Yeah, good news indeed. I've got an appointment for Ava, who's 16. She's getting vaccinated this Thursday, and now they just sent out a thing from her school saying they're going to have a vaccination at the high school. I think they wrote if enough people sign up, so that would be disconcerting if they didn't, but that makes sense to vaccinate teens and now tweens to have the vaccination available at their school. That makes complete sense. I for one, support a mandate that will force people to vaccinate their kids if they want to go to school. That's just me, as controversial as that may sound. Certainly happened in a number of colleges, and probably most colleges, before the fall semester. That's my prediction, for whatever it's worth. Anyway, getting them vaccinated. Hope you're getting your teens and tweens vaccinated as well. And now I want to play even the Fox and the Friends on the morning show admitted that they were all vaccinated. But it's up to you. It's your choice if you want to, they were sure to say. Here are these three fools.
Look at San Francisco. They get 20 cases a day. 70% of the population is vaccinated. Why are they having any restrictions at all? Walk around. I know there's you have to step over a lot of homeless people to get to where you have to go. But having said that, they don't seem to care about them. You should not be wearing masks anymore indoors. Doctors are basically saying that, and we should understand that. You can't just say to people, go get vaccinated. Your life's not going to change. When you go indoors, you better put a mask on. When you walk outside, the President of the United States wearing 2 masks because I want to protect you, he shouts out over the weekend. From what? It's 96% effective. You can't carry the virus. What are you protecting us from?
I will say there is so much freedom. I understand there are people that have vaccine hesitancy, but we all 3 are vaccinated. And I will tell you, when I got it, it was just like, okay. Now, exactly. Yeah. Now I know I'm not going to get it. I'm not going to die from it if I do get it. There's a small percentage of a chance that you could get it.
Right. But it's the people who have not gotten the shot, which, ultimately they're the ones who are in peril, and they're the ones that,
making their own decisions.
That's right. Absolutely. But nonetheless, I think that's probably why the CDC is still doing that. When you were talking to...
Man, I'm sorry that I played that. I actually feel dumber having listened to that conversation. Listening to those 3 people batted around is really, I mean, it's so bad. It seems like a parody. Every time I watch that show, I'm like, is this real? Are these people really having this conversation, or is it a parody? To some extent, I feel the same way, though, about Morning Joe, because Joe Scarborough and Mika are married, and it's bizarre. And so I really can't watch or listen to that show either. All right, perhaps the most important soundbite or moment in yesterday's news cycle out of Washington, at least, came from the Congresswoman from Wyoming, daughter of Dick, Liz Cheney, who went on the House floor last night, a little after 8 p.m., and made a speech that went viral immediately. And there were people on the far left and on the far right, I mean, the reality right, I think, that were sharing this and applauding it. And I guess the entire thing is worth listening to, but I'm going to give you I think it's about 4 minutes here of Liz Cheney. And by the way, when she started speaking, almost all of her colleagues in the Republican caucus, over 100 members apparently, just walked out. If you need to know anything more about the cult that is Trump, let me know, but that's all I need. Here she is right now, Liz Cheney.
I watched that same Pope take my father's hands, look in his eyes, and say, God bless America. God has blessed America, Mr. Speaker, but our freedom only survives if we protect it, if we honor our oath taken before God in this chamber to support and defend the Constitution, if we recognize threats to freedom when they arise. Today, we face a threat America has never seen before. A former president who provoked a violent attack on this Capitol in an effort to steal the election has resumed his aggressive effort to convince Americans that the election was stolen from him. He risks inciting further violence. Millions of Americans have been misled by the former president. They have heard only his words, but not the truth, as he continues to undermine our democratic process, sowing seeds of doubt about whether democracy really works at all. I am a conservative Republican, And the most conservative of conservative principles is reverence for the rule of law. The Electoral College has voted. More than 60 state and federal courts, including multiple judges the former president appointed, have rejected his claims. The Trump Department of Justice investigated the former president's claims of widespread fraud and found no evidence to support them. The election is over. That is the rule of law. That is our constitutional process. Those who refuse to accept the rulings of our courts are at war with the Constitution. Our duty is clear. Every one of us who has sworn the oath must act to prevent the unraveling of our democracy. This is not about policy. This is not about partisanship. This is about our duty as Americans. Remaining silent and ignoring the lie emboldens the liar. I will not participate in that. I will not sit back and watch in silence while others lead our party down a path that abandons the rule of law and joins the former president's crusade to undermine our democracy. As the party of Reagan, Republicans have championed democracy, won the Cold War, and defeated the Soviet communists. Today, America is on the cusp of another Cold War, this time with communist China. Attacks against our democratic process and the rule of law empower our adversaries and feed communist propaganda that American democracy is a failure. We must speak the truth. Our election was not stolen, and America has not failed. I received a message last week from a Gold Star father who said, "Standing up for the truth honors all who gave all." We must all strive to be worthy of the sacrifice of those who have died for our freedom. They are the patriots Catherine Lee Bates described in the words of America the Beautiful when she wrote, "O beautiful for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life." Ultimately, Mr. Speaker, this is at the heart of what our oath requires, that we love our country more, that we love her so much that we will stand above politics to defend her, that we will do everything in our power to protect our Constitution and our freedom that has been paid for by the blood of so many. We must love America so much that we will never yield in her defense. That is our duty.
Powerful stuff. James Fallows, one of my all-time favorite journalists of The Atlantic now, writes, "I've disagreed with members of the Cheney family on virtually every issue of policy, but compare what she is doing with Lindsey Graham, Kevin McCarthy, Nikki Haley, Rubio, or Cruz, or the ineffable Mitch McConnell, or Stefanik herself. Nevertheless, she persisted." Then, of course, you got Bill Kristol on the far right, who tweets, "Liz Cheney's fight for the GOP may seem a lost cause, but, quote, there is no such thing as a lost cause because there is no such thing as a gained cause. We fight for lost causes because we know that our defeat and dismay may be the preface to our successor's victory." That's a quote from T.S. Eliot that he shared. Bill Kristol also tweeted, "Liz Cheney's speech marked her farewell to the House GOP leadership, but it also marked the beginning of an effort to save the Republican Party for democracy, freedom, and the rule of law. If that effort results in a 2024 presidential campaign, this speech will have launched it. Oh, dear Lord." Her Republican colleague, Adam Kinzinger, tweeted, "This is leadership, this is integrity, this is Liz Cheney, and I'm damn proud to support her," and then shared a clip of that floor speech. Joe Scarborough tweets, "Politics is divided into those who love American democracy and those who loathe it. Tonight, Liz Cheney stood up for those patriots who love it." And Laura Bassett, who I love, tweets, "I was going to say Liz Cheney is brave as hell for this speech, but she's literally just acknowledging reality, so the bar is just so low." Just some reaction for you around the Twittersphere to Liz Cheney's speech last night. And so while that was probably the biggest domestic story, I mean, obviously all things COVID and then all things Republican Party, the future of it, Liz Cheney's floor speech. But the biggest story of the day has to be the violence that has broken out in the Middle East between Palestinians and Israelis. And this is always a tough subject. It's always a difficult issue for people to understand. I think most folks are probably confused about it. And then the rest of us are very opinionated about it, usually take one side or the other. I personally, I see all of the viewpoints here. I mean, I have basically sympathized with the Palestinian people for most of my adult life, the more I've gotten to know the history there. But I also, of course, understand the Israeli issues and concerns. In the end, I always look at who has the power and who is wielding it more. And it's just it's so disproportionate, as it always is, the violence there. I mean, the Israelis, hundreds of rockets were shot by Palestinians into Israel. Most of them were shot down by the Iron Dome defense. It was amazing watching these videos. If you haven't seen them go viral, they are terrifying and awful, but also awesome and fascinating. Awesome in the lowercase, uppercase. I don't know what I'm talking about. But the point is, who do you side with? How do you understand it? It's challenging. It's difficult. But the Israelis have fighter jets that they are basically firing. I know it's precision, but still they know what their targets are. And I know that they warn people before they hit them, but still they destroyed a 13-story building that housed families. Apparently nobody was in it because they warned them to get out. But there have been already so many deaths, and including children in Gaza. So it's horrible, but I thought this was an interesting clip. Ben Rhodes, who, by the way, former deputy national security advisor for President Obama, but he tweeted yesterday, just try for a moment to look at the world through the eyes of a Palestinian child. And this is a guy who certainly understands all of the politics over there. Anyway, here he is last night on MSNBC, giving as much context and insight as you can in just a couple of minutes of a soundbite that I'm going to share with you now. And remember, this is only one point of view.
Well, it's a horrifying situation. It's a worst-case scenario of escalation, Chris, where you had this kind of systematic effort to remove the Palestinians from East Jerusalem. You had these attacks, really, or operations against worshippers in Al-Aqsa Mosque during the holy month of Ramadan for Muslims. Then you have Hamas, a terrorist organization, firing these indiscriminate rockets in Israel. And now we see the escalation where Israel comes in very heavy-handed. They're blowing up apartment blocks where civilians live. The Biden administration is going to have to get involved. The two Gaza wars in 2008 and then in 2012 during Obama's tenure took the United States getting involved to try to push a ceasefire here. I think the Biden team was reluctant to get involved in the Middle East because there's not a lot of prospect for peace. But ultimately, unless the U.S. steps in here, this situation can get even further out of control.
How have things changed? I mean, what did you learn about handling this portfolio and the U.S.'s relationship to Israel and to the Palestinian territories? And what do you learn from your time in the Obama administration in navigating that? What surprised you?
Well, I mean, Chris, I'm just going to be honest here. I mean, what I learned is that the old talking points don't work anymore. We're accustomed to U.S. officials, people like me, going out and talking about our commitment to a two-state solution, a secure Israel next to an independent Palestine. But the reality is the facts on the ground have changed overwhelmingly in the last decade or two, to the point where a Palestinian state is almost impossible, a viable, contiguous Palestinian state. The Israeli government under Bibi Netanyahu has moved further and further to the right and is not interested in peace. And he himself has said that he doesn't want there to be a Palestinian state on his watch. And I think what a lot of progressives in the Democratic Party are responding to is the fact that the old talking points don't apply to this circumstance anymore. There's such a vast asymmetry of power between Israel and the Palestinians that people are saying, hey, wait a minute here. Obviously, we condemn Hamas and its indiscriminate rocket fire. Hamas doesn't represent all Palestinians. And frankly, the Palestinian people are increasingly in a dire circumstance. And I think that's opening up fissures in the Democratic Party at the same time that the Republican Party, in part because of the evangelical support for Israel, has become even more in lockstep with the right wing of the Israeli political system.
So as you can see, it's extremely complicated. That's Ben Rhodes, who was on MSNBC with Chris Hayes last night. I thought that was an interesting segment worth watching, and I should try to get him on the show. There I go again. And also, what do you think about that? I'd love to hear from you. Is there a book? Is there an article? Is there a video, a class, anything that you suggest to try to understand as much as you can the history there, as well as the reality of the current politics? Would love to hear your sources. I will try to get them on. I got to say, I love Peter Beinart and his writing. I also really learned a lot from watching Noam Chomsky debate Alan Dershowitz at Harvard. You can find that on YouTube. It's like 2 hours. Always appreciated reading Chomsky's stuff. And so much more. There's so many different sources and outlets and articles that I've read about this, as well as anecdotes. My brother married an Israeli woman and worked himself in the West Bank shortly after 9/11 as an EMT. My brother worked on the Palestinian Red Crescent ambulances for just under a month there. Actually was detained by the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, who let him go once they apparently, I forget the story, but saw his New York State driver's license. And it was shortly after 9/11, and there was some sympathy or something there. I'll have to get him back on, period, much less to tell that story. So I've got a lot of insights and opinions on it, as well as a whole bunch of Jewish friends and Palestinian friends. And it's complicated, to say the least, but I'm always ready to take that issue and any other head on. So that is all I've got for you. In terms of audio clips, there's a whole bunch of other news stories I want to mention. I always want to share, and that's why I do it right here now in what I call the news dump.
Shouty maskless man at that gasoline pump. Luckily he'll be gone by today's news dump.
We want freedom for the world!
Thank you, Pete Go. All right, let's start in Chicago, where authorities have released 1,000 feral cats into the streets of Chicago to tackle the rat explosion. And in a related story, authorities are also releasing hundreds of eagles and coyotes that will be released to tackle the cat explosion. So that's a thing that's happening. And speaking of animal stories, that horse is going to race in the Preakness. It's called Medina Spirit. It's the horse that former disgraced President Donald Trump called a junkie, and that the owner and trainer of the horse said was not drugged, and it was about cancel culture. Anyway, horse racing can't afford to not have the Derby winner in the next part of the Triple Crown, which is the Preakness. They have to have the horse race. They got it because it's horse racing. I hate horse racing so much. And I hate this story so much, and that's why I'm moving on. Everybody is talking about this rarely seen deep-sea creature known as a football fish that was found on shore in California. And apparently it's one of 300 living species of anglerfish, normally found at depths of more than 3,000 feet below the surface. But why wouldn't it come up just to see what the hell is happening in the world around it? And once it saw it, decided it's just going to beach itself because it heard Rand Paul questioning Dr. Fauci. Well, here's a story that's not an animal story. Well, maybe it is because it's about the NRA. And aren't they animals? A judge on Tuesday dismissed the NRA's bankruptcy case, ruling that the organization can't use the bankruptcy code to relocate from New York, where it's facing a lawsuit, to Texas, a more gun-friendly state. And that, my friend, is very, very good news. And in response to this development, the head of the NRA turned into a bat and flew off to a yacht where he then killed an exotic animal and took a picture of it because he's a vampire who lives off the blood of innocent Americans. Other than that, he seems like a perfectly fine fella. The Washington Post finally hired a new executive editor to replace the recently retired and well-respected Marty Baron. And the Washington Post, now owned by, of course, Jeff Bezos, named Associated Press veteran Sally Busby as its executive editor yesterday, making her the first woman in the paper's 144-year history to lead the newsroom. So that's quite a historic thing. A 71-year-old hiker who went missing in the Columbia River Gorge in Oregon Saturday has been found safe after spending 2 nights in the wilderness. His name is Joseph Dean. He's from Portland. Went missing around 8:30 p.m. Texts his wife saying he was lost somewhere on the Rock of Ages Trail, and rescue crews found him conscious and breathing Monday morning and provided him with first aid and saved him. And that's an awesome story that I wanted to share with you because I always like to share good news as well. And the search for the Houston Tiger whereabouts remains a mystery as a jailed man says he's not the owner. A lawyer claims that he is not the owner of the animal, but the search continues Tuesday for the Bengal tiger that sparked panic in a Houston residential neighborhood and, of course, went viral, and it's pretty much my favorite story. If you're traveling over Memorial Day weekend, folks, expect lots of company. U.S. highways are expected to be far busier over the Memorial Day holiday weekend than last year. Traffic still is not going to reach pre-pandemic levels, according to a forecast by the AAA Auto Club, but they do say that travel is going to increase because more Americans have been vaccinated against COVID-19. About a third of U.S. adults, and consumer confidence is also growing. But will they have any gas is the big question. Yeah, they will. Stop panicking, everybody. But still, an important question and issue. And anyway, I won't be going anywhere Memorial Day weekend. Staycation, baby! Prime gardening weekend, folks. And that's when Project Landscape here at the Vendome household. My wife's last name is Vendrami. Mine is Dominic. She didn't take my name, so we call ourselves the Vendomes. Anyway, that is when that's supposed to be completed, according to my goals. Little bit behind. I was ahead, now I feel behind, but working on it. Will you be traveling on Memorial Day or this summer? Would love to know. We'll talk about it on Thursday night at our Hangout. That's tomorrow night at 8 p.m. for all stand-up subscribers. All right, that is it for today's news dump. So much more news to get to, but I'm out of time because I have two very good interviews. I really hope that you'll listen to both. I learned so much from both of these guests. Really enjoyed conversations with both of them. Coming up, my conversation with India Walton. She is running for mayor in Buffalo. Came highly recommended from some trusted sources, and we had a fascinating, thoughtful, interesting, and really important conversation. And I just really, really think she's great and want to support her and want you to support her. Consider maybe giving her some money. But right now, I want to play for you my conversation with David Litt, who is a former Obama speechwriter, now New York Times bestselling author. He's written 2 books, a memoir of his time in the Obama White House called Thanks, Obama, My Hopey Changey White House Years. And more importantly, in my opinion, his new book, it's called Democracy in One Book or Less, How It Works, Why It Doesn't, and Why Fixing It is Easier Than You Think. Such an important book. I love the way that he talks, the way that he writes, and he was on Newsmax yesterday and went absolutely viral for challenging the anchor to... well, you know what? Jimmy Kimmel actually talked about it on his show on ABC last night. Let's let him tell you.
Tonight. Did you see Elon Musk hosting SNL over the weekend? A lot of people watched. It was their 3rd highest rated episode of the year. There was so much focus, in fact, that Newsmax brought an expert on to review it. Unfortunately for them, what I guess they didn't account for is that the guy they picked to do the review is a comedy writer who worked for President Obama.
What happened on SNL this weekend was that people made stuff up and then said it on television like it's true. And that actually happens pretty frequently in American TV. For example, in 2020, Dominion Voting Systems sued Newsmax over its false claims about election fraud. Newsmax was lying to its own viewers, and Newsmax had to settle that lawsuit. So actually, I just need to check in. Are you still telling that lie, or are you telling new lies?
And then the anchor, a guy named Rob Finnerty, had to tap dance to make sure his overlords at Newsmax didn't get hit with another lawsuit from Dominion.
That's fine, David. I know this is a very funny moment for you. I'm sure you didn't sleep last night as you prepared to sort of try and get the morning anchor on Newsmax. I'd be happy to talk with you about whatever you want to talk about. Obviously, it's not the topic that we have set up for right now. So if you'd like to talk about Saturday Night Live, I will do that with you. But obviously, I'm not going to talk about anything else right now. So you decide right now, in this moment on live television. Go ahead.
Did Dominion Voting Systems have any impact on the 2020 election?
Oh, that's unfortunate because I was really excited about this interview.
Yeah, we all were. We were all excited about that interview.
Well, I certainly was, and that's why I reached out to David Litt right away and asked him if we could talk, and we did the very next day. Here now, my interview with David Litt on Twitter at David Litt. Okay, now I've got David Litt joining me, and hopefully I won't receive a similar experience as that poor Newsmax anchor.
I only do ambush interviews now. I know we've talked many times before, but now I've completely changed.
So I'm actually, listeners, everybody's interested in it. I know this is not the most important thing for you, but in a way I can make it really important. But first of all, can you just tell me how that went down? The Newsmax Booker reached out to you because you're not only a political guy, but you're a comedy guy, which is why I love talking to you. Like, how did that booking occur?
So they reached out to me right when Elon Musk was named as the host for SNL. And I think I've been trying to figure this out. So part of it is this was a booker who I had worked with at MSNBC who had then moved over to Newsmax. So she had booked me on MSNBC and then worked for Newsmax and booked me there. So I guess that's why they reached out to me. The other thing is, this was right in their wheelhouse because Elon Musk was kind of like triggering liberals. So it was a chance to do, like, theoretically it was a comedy segment, but if we had talked about SNL, it would have been a like, is comedy too woke? That's where we were clearly going, right? Or like, are SNL's ratings bad because it's too liberal? That kind of like premise was clearly. So it's a very Newsmaxy topic.
Newsmaxy. I would actually love to hear your analysis on that, but moving on, some people will say, listen, I'm not going on Fox News. I'm not going to perpetuate their bullshit. Same thing with Newsmax and any of the rest. I disagree. I think almost always disagree with it, except for someone like Tucker Carlson who pre-tapes then edits, maybe. But I mean, as long as that's not something you sign up for, I think it's really important for someone like you to go on a Newsmax. Why did you agree to do it? And then when did you decide, and this is how I'm going to handle it?
So I think it's an interesting question because I think on one hand, and it's also fun, like any of your listeners who saw me do this thing on Newsmax and you'll be like, oh, he's snappy and, like to the point, are about to be disappointed. But let me try to analyze this in an overly complicated way. So I think that Newsmax in particular is not really worth going on because they are trying to legitimize themselves as a news source. So I think it was worth going on to talk about the lies that they spread about the election, but to have a normal back and forth conversation, like that kind of can work on Fox News. Pete Buttigieg is really good at that on Fox News. But Newsmax is at a point where they're trying to become the next Fox News. And I think this is one of the reasons why they would have wanted someone like me on. So they could say, see, we've had a Democrat, like we talked about something, we were respectful. And, please don't remember that whole thing where we helped incite an insurrection on January 6th. That's old news. And so I think that's where they're at in their kind of their journey through the right wing media ecosystem. And then I think Fox News, yes, sometimes if you're live and are good at that, like Pete Buttigieg, I think is proving that you can do that. It's really hard. I've been on Fox News as kind of like a token Democrat once, and it was totally nice. They were very nice to me. Yep. They didn't, I didn't like have to betray any principles, but I still felt like, why? I think I'm just here so that they can only have like the Tucker Carlsons in their well-rated opinion block. And then the earlier stuff, they can be like, see, we're fair and balanced. Right. We had a Democrat on, we had a Republican on, we weren't mean to anybody. So it is really tricky. And I felt like with this, it was more of a, like this was a little more obvious, right? I didn't know if I was going to do it because there's so many ways I felt like that I could make a fool of myself. But I knew that I was either going to say no and then like write a very, high horse email about why I was declining to go on, or I was going to say yes and then talk to them about the single most important thing about Newsmax, which is their role in spreading lies about the election.
I love that you went on. I love the way you handled it. I think you nailed it. I think that is the kind of thing that can go sideways real quick because you can't control it. And the host, the anchor, is in control, but you nailed it really well. Why did you decide to go with the Dominion thing? And why does, more importantly, that matter?
Well, so I ended up talking to some people who I felt like were like good at questions, right? I'm not a reporter. I don't do this kind of thing. And so I talked to people who were good. I had a bunch of ideas that were all very high concept and not very good. And I'm glad I talked to people who were like smarter about this than I am, because one of the things, the piece of advice that I got was basically to like root what I was going to talk about in an actual piece of research, like basically show up with some receipts. And I think particularly with the Dominion thing, one of the things I was thinking about is like the guy who I was talking to is much more polished than I am on television, and clearly much less nervous than I was. But he literally could not talk about Dominion because of this lawsuit. I mean, it's a very rare thing where people who are paid to lie on television actually can't lie on television because their network is going to get sued and lose all its money. So it's a very specific circumstance with Newsmax with this Dominion lawsuit where they had to admit they lied. Like the whole Trump, Fox News, Roger Ailes playbook is never admit that you're lying. And Newsmax got too far out in front of its skis, and, they got caught in something where they're in legal trouble. And so they got boxed into a corner.
I want to ask you, well, I mean, it's so great. How do you feel about the reaction to it? Over 2 million views now, David. Now, about a third of them, to be fair, are me alone. I've watched it hundreds of thousands of times. What's been the reaction to it? Who have you heard from? Just real quick before we, again, move on to I want to hear some of your other thoughts about media.
Well, it's funny. I mean, one of the, I finished the hit and then I walked upstairs and, my wife said, how did it go? And I said, I don't think I embarrassed myself, but I don't think that anyone's going to pay attention to it on the internet. And I was extremely wrong.
It drove the day yesterday. It really was one of the few, every day, a few clips have their role. It was the top banner at Mediaite. It's got millions of views yesterday. So yeah, go ahead.
It was really weird. Good weird, right?
Sure, yeah.
And again, not because, obviously it was cool to do a thing that people were talking about, but more than that, it was also I think it was cathartic for a lot of people. Yes. I kind of went into this thinking, if I had a friend who had the opportunity to be on Newsmax and force them to, at least in a small way, deal with all of the lies they told about the election, I would tell that friend to suck it up and go for it.
Yeah.
And then I almost chickened out, but I was like, okay, fine. I would clearly tell myself, if I were not myself, that I should just take a chance and do it. So I'm glad that I did.
You should always listen to yourself.
No, I don't think so. I think sometimes.
Well,
I will say, the night before, I was talking with my wife about it, and she was like, "Is there a reason no one else has done this?" And I was like, "That's actually a great question." I need to think about that question before. And I've said this to other people, 5 minutes before I had to be on Skype or whatever, I was like, I think I might just back out. But in the end, I'm glad that I went for it.
Well, the reason why people don't do it, honestly, in my opinion, is because they want to be invited back. Because being on any news outlet, any show, for people who want to be heard, who in your case mostly, write things, great articles, and you can read them all at David's website. They're neatly posted there, davidlittbooks.com. Of course, get his books. But people don't, in your books, they want to be invited back so they can continue to promote their writing, their ideas, their livelihood. And so they, generally speaking, don't bite the hand that feeds them in that case, especially when there's not that many big media outlets. That's why people don't do it. You won't be invited back is my guess, and that's a good thing. And most people just don't want to make that choice. They walk the line so they get invited back, including me in the past. I've walked the line at places like Fox News and even CNN and MSNBC. So that's my thought.
That is definitely true, right? Not getting to be a regular commentator on Newsmax is an opportunity I'm okay missing in my life, so it makes it a lot easier. The other thing that I will say is I also don't think that places like Newsmax are mostly booking people like me. I think it was, as you kind of started the show with, this particular thing where, because I kind of split my life in the comedy world and the politics world, they were like, oh, we'll bring him on to talk about comedy. And obviously that's not what I wanted to do. And so I think that is I think in that sense, it was, again, this kind of thinking of I probably will not get this particular chance. And then the other thing that I'll say, and again, to some extent, to credit the host who I was talking with, right, is you know how this is as a comedian. If someone's heckling, they don't have the mic, right? So that's the other reason where I was like, oh, this is good. This is going to be quite difficult. Is even if you're, you have the element of surprise in some way, you're also I don't have the mic. I'm not the person who's used to doing TV all the time. So there's many, many ways that this could go south, right? And I think that's the other element of it. I mean, I think.
For sure. But the bottom line is what you did. If it's live, you're going to get one good punch in before, in this case, the anchor realizes what's happening. I got two. You got two. This guy put you on the spot and thought he had you, and then you nailed him again. And the best part of it, and like I said, I've watched it almost 1 million times, is your smile at the end. Your smile at the end really was something that, with your second comment, that gave me great satisfaction, and I am not alone in that. What did you hear from friends and colleagues about that? And did Newsmax reach out to you and get mad?
No, I haven't heard from Newsmax. The anchor there followed me on Twitter immediately after, which I thought was like a weird kind of oddly friendly gesture.
All right.
And then I think he tweeted something about it saying like, maybe I'll have him back on. And I was like, you might be overstating how excited I would be by that prospect. But no, I didn't hear anything back from Newsmax. And I think actually it kind of like, I got a couple of emails. At first, it was all from Newsmax viewers, right? So I got some emails that were like pretty, nothing too bad given the history of like Newsmax spurring death threats against people. But a lot of things just calling me an asshole, which is relatively fair. Yeah. And a couple of things which are interesting, like kind of being like, you'll see Dominion voting systems is going down. And I was I think my view on this. But so I think that was like, and then I for the most part, just got a lot of people essentially saying like, it was nice to see someone do that. Yep. It's about time. And that's how I would have felt if I had seen someone do it. Right. Like I was just like, thank goodness someone did it.
Yeah. I actually sent you several.
It's not like, it's not like that's it for Newsmax. They'll still be there. Misinformation is still a thing. This is like one small gesture, but it was a good gesture. I think I'm glad I did it.
Yeah, I sent you several emails, tweets, and I repackaged the flowers I gave my wife, which you should be getting in a couple of Mother's Day flowers for you as a thank you. I'm not that classy.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important. I loved it, and I want to just now move on to ask you about just media in general. You worked in the Obama White House. You're a very progressive guy, super smart guy. And I wonder what you think just in general. I don't think we've really talked that much about media in the past, but about the kind of the strength. My opinion is that the right wing media has always had a real stranglehold on Republican lawmakers, policymakers, and it has never been true of Democrats, and it's still not true of Democrats. I would argue that organized, activists, grassroots have a lot more influence, which is the way it's, I think, probably supposed to be. But if I were to ask you to kind of make it a binary, what do you think the difference is between the kind of conservative media and, quote, liberal media, whatever that even is? I mean, all conservatives think corporate media is liberal media. And then, folks on the left like us think, wait, no, that's not true. Yeah. But how do you look at that all?
Well, first of all, I think actually something that has changed, certainly since the Obama years, is there is now a liberal media. Then there's, the mainstream media, the corporate, whatever you want to call it, and a conservative media. It used to just be you had your mainstream media and your conservative media. And I do think that one of the reasons, frankly, that like a lot of people saw this on Twitter was that it got attention starting in the left-wing media, and people, and that's a little bit loose and disaggregated, but that's kind of where, people started to see this clip. And I think it's a sign that the left-wing media exists. And when I say that, I don't mean it in the sense that like, the New York Times is left-wing. I mean it in the sense that like, my former colleagues at Crooked Media, right? Like they've built a huge media company that is about talking to and for a progressive audience. Yeah. And
Young Turks
used to exist. So I think that's really important. I think the question now is going to be the kind of like mainstream political media. Can they figure out a way to stay relevant in a world where it's very easy to go with your side? But then at the same time, and this I think is really important, I do think there's a fundamental difference between these two sides, right? If you look at the progressive media, they have a point of view, but they also believe in the truth. They tend to have a sense of shame if they get stuff wrong. They tend to try to get stuff right. It's not pure propaganda. It is trying to figure, it's seeing the world through a specific lens, but it's not, creating a set of alternative facts. If you look at the right-wing media, it is very, very focused on creating a set of alternative facts and getting people to believe things that are not true. So I do think there's a fundamental difference, even though there is now, conservative media, liberal media, whatever you want to call it, centrist and mainstream media. That doesn't mean, it's the same as like saying there's a Democratic Party and a Republican Party, but they're not sort of equal all the time, right? So I don't want both sides of this.
No, I love the way that you explain that with nuance. That's perfectly well done, especially the point about the future of, quote unquote, mainstream media, the cable news networks. Maybe we could talk about some of the newspapers. I think we so often when we use the word media are referring to literally 3 networks or maybe 4 or 5, but generally cable networks. But I think that's true. And you're seeing that a lot of the ratings have gone down since the election, apparently for cable news. And I wonder if that will be permanent. And then you're seeing the rise of shows that are funded like mine or Substack and so on. And that can be a good and bad thing as well. So it'll be really interesting to see. But I think you nailed it right there where the future of kind of mainstream is going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah. And Pete, I will say the other thing that you kind of alluded to is that I think in the progressive world at the moment, it is not kind of like there's all one, if you're a conservative, you want to be on Fox. If you're trying to reach a very specific set of like true believers in, election conspiracies and so on, you might also want to be on Newsmax or OANN or whatever. In the progressive world, I do think it's a little more diffuse, right? There's just a lot of different people with a lot of different voices. And I also think that is generally how progressives work, right? We tend to be lots of people doing their own thing, all moving generally in the same direction. If we can ever get coordinated, like that's the joy and pain of being progressive. But I also think, and, committed to a set of like actual facts and values. Go ahead.
Well,
Sorry.
I would just argue, like, I'm really concerned to see, what do you call, I don't think it's the dirtbag left. I think it's the, I don't know, what you're seeing a lot of people on the left, especially places like YouTube. I think of Jimmy Dore a lot because I know him really well. He's an old friend of mine, and they're becoming what the right is, which is to say, what I mean is they lack any nuance. There's no pragmatic look at anything. We're not talking about policy. We're demanding that Democrats who are extremely progressive, like AOC, do things that they can't do, all in the name of getting clicks and views, all in the name of that. And that's deeply concerning to me because it's very satisfying for any human being to hear things put that way, but it's not real life. It's not governing as well. Do you think that that's a concern on the left now?
Well, I think that instinct of, how do we get the most clicks or how do we get the most views or how do I get the most money, right, which often comes from clicks and views, that's not unique to right-wing people or left-wing people or whatever. I do think that the big difference is that on the right-wing side, that kind of media hasn't just leaked into the political process, it dominates the political process. So there's, it's a difference in degree so huge to be a difference in kind. This sort of thing, I mean, like a lot of things, right? There's, plenty of like bad people who are Democrats and bad people who are Republicans, but that doesn't mean that like everything is equal all the time. And so I think that, if you look at the right-wing media, Fox News, and again, to a lesser extent, these kind of junior outlets like Newsmax, they control Republican politicians, right? Fox News turns on you and you're a Republican politician, you're either going to lose your job or you're going to figure out how to get it, back in Fox's good graces. And you really do not have a choice.
There are so many examples of that. It's such a great point. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's so that control, it's kind of the tail wagging the dog.
Yeah, for sure. On the
left, there's absolutely, some people don't tell the truth, right? That's not a exclusively right-wing phenomenon, but I think it's a much more fringe element, right? And this is what's so frustrating. And this is not true among voters, right? Like if you look at a lot of Republican voters, they are not as fringy as Fox News or Newsmax. Some people are, but you have the tail wagging the dog in the Republican Party in a way that you don't see in the Democratic Party, at least not nearly to the same extent. And hopefully that remains true for Democrats. I think it probably will for a lot of different reasons. Like Democrats have just always been a bigger tent.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. And I didn't mean to say that it's a similar problem, but the tail wagging the dog is certainly the case. And we have so many examples where Hannity and Tucker, I mean, even with Trump, I mean, I was thinking about this the other day, in case anybody would say somehow that Joe Biden was being influenced by this progressive or that, and what they're saying, it was like Hannity was on the phone with Donald Trump like all the time, like every night.
Yeah, I mean,
like on the phone.
And also like Larry Kudlow, right, who was a conservative pundit he had worked in the Reagan administration, but he was basically a conservative pundit. Yep. They were like, cool, we'll make him in charge of our economic policy.
Well, so many people like that. I mean, the worst is that, basically what you're saying, let me simplify it or minimize it even more. Trump would turn on TV, see somebody who said something and immediately hire him in the White House. Right. Some of the most consequential positions. I forget that radiologist who he hired to look over the COVID relief effort.
Atlas, right.
Yeah, that motherfucker. Right. And then also the worst is Peter Navarro. Right. That dude is straight up evil, like terrible, bad person. And again, just saw him on TV and hired him and awful.
Can I tell the weirdest thing? In the 2016 campaign, I was on MSNBC with him and we were like, I don't know what we were arguing about. We were arguing about something, but I was like, in the same way that I should not be like running trade policy or economic policy for the White House. Like if you're just on MSNBC talking about that thing, and probably you shouldn't just like immediately be like, okay, you talk about this on TV, you should be running the thing.
Oh, no.
I think that also like what we're getting at too is this, it's not just like, are you liberal or conservative? It's this competent versus incompetent thing, right? Like a lot of my friends who are now back in the administration, they're not on TV all the time. They're really, really smart and really good at what they do. And also know that sometimes like talking about it in public is not necessarily the way to be effective at what you do. And they're also, and like, that's one of the reasons why the Biden administration has gotten the vaccine rollout going the way that it has. And one of the reasons why it managed to get the COVID relief plan through Congress and all the other stuff that they've done is like, yeah, they have a communication strategy and they're doing a good job of that too. But not everybody is trying to like be a pundit or be a, cable news celebrity all the time.
Yeah. The difference.
Do you mind if I just continue ranting for one moment?
Yeah, go ahead. Do you have more?
Here's just to finish that rant. It also, because it bugs me because you see a lot of conservatives criticize Hollywood liberals and are like, oh, see all these celebrities who are Democrats. But then you look at on the right now, Sean Hannity isn't a journalist. He's a celebrity, right? Like that's on the right wing, the celebrities are political people, right? Like Lou Dobbs is not a journalist. He's a TV personality. Donald Trump, until he became the president, was a TV personality. And so what we're seeing is like celebrity politics. Again, it happens all over the place. Part of that is social media, but the difference in degree is pretty decisive. We're seeing celebrity politics just take hold of the right. And also, you've also seen people like leave their jobs as a United States congressperson because it would be better. They'd have more power if they have a show on Fox. And that says a lot about where the Republican, sort of the official Republican Party is. And I think that's really bad for, the ability to look good on television is not always the same as the ability to govern wisely or well.
Well,
it's the same.
You said the key word that I was just going to respond with, which, again, to minimize everything you're saying in a soundbite, it's the difference is Republicans, politicians are almost entirely about messaging and judges and not governing. And Democrats, like your friends who aren't going on, they're about actual governing and trying to do things. And, that just goes back to the ideology of conservatives in America today, which is pretty specific to America, or at least more acute, that Republicans they hate government at every level. They hate it.
So, I actually think I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. Please. I think that has changed somewhat. If you look around at states that are controlled by Republican politicians right now. And again, this does not reflect the values of a lot of Republican voters, but it does reflect the values of the politicians. Banning trans people from playing sports. That's banning women from having abortions, right? Like these are government policies, right? Like taking, making it, right. If you look at Florida, for example, where they've like made it easier to drive a car into a bunch of protesters. I suppose that is to some extent a, removing government from the equation, but it certainly looks to me like an activist agenda. And then, of course, making it harder and harder to vote, which is like the top Republican priority right now. All of these, I think Republicans have really abandoned the idea of small government in favor for a government that works for a specific group of people. And I think that is really a change that we've seen even since, I first moved to Washington in 2009. Republicans, I think, are not really the party of small government. They're the party of an activist government. But the question becomes, on whose behalf would the government act?
Yeah, I mean, so what you're saying is that they do govern, but who are they governing for and what are they doing? And I guess I would say, banning trans people is not really governing at all, because it's a policy that affects like 4 people. It goes back to my point about messaging. Look, we're protecting you from a problem that does not exist. It's not really governing, which takes me though to your one of your recent pieces. I love that you're writing at Democracy Docket. That's great. I love the work that Mark Elias has done. It's a great outlet to learn, and you've got a couple great pieces there. But in your piece about the census, you're basically saying that, Republicans they're not even looking out for their own interests in certain states. They're looking at for a larger interest, and they're hurting to some extent themselves. I'd argue, by the way, a great example of this might be, you're talking more about the census, but I don't know if you've heard, 3 Republican states, I want to say Arkansas, South Carolina, and one more, they're cutting off federal aid for people because their excuse is that those people don't want to work. And that doesn't seem, same thing with not allowing the Medicaid expansion. They're not doing what is in their own people's self-interest, I guess maybe because their own people are not supporting their agenda. They're Democrat, they're progressives, I don't know. But help me understand what is happening in these states as a result of the census and how they're not doing even what is in their own state's self-interest.
So I think, if you look at the census, there's a really good example of this. So the census, there is no kind of constitutional requirement about how to conduct the census. There's a constitutional requirement that we do it once every 10 years, but no census is perfectly accurate. And there's no way of ensuring or even no way of incentivizing that each state run its count along with the federal government and get the count everybody, right? Because if you undercount, you're going to have less power. So that's the only incentive that's built into the system, is this idea that like New York State's going to want to count everybody so that New York State has the maximum number of lawmakers they can have and the maximum number of electoral college votes and federal funding. But so is Florida, and so is California, and so is Texas. Every state is going to do everything it can to count every last person, because the more people you have, the more clout your state has. That should work in theory. It no longer works in practice. So in red states, what we saw, and when I say red states, I mean like states that were completely controlled by Republican politicians. So Florida, Texas, they underfunded the census outreach. They didn't fund it at all, which made it harder to count certain people. So Florida was projected to pick up, I think this is right, 2 House seats. They're going to pick up 1. Texas was projected to pick up 3 House seats. They're going to pick up 2. On its face, you might say, okay, well, that was self-sabotage, right? Texas, the Republicans in Texas didn't do their outreach. Now their state doesn't have as much power in Congress. But they made a decision. They would rather undercount Texans who they think aren't going to vote for them, which in practice means, non-white people who don't speak English as a first language, people who move around a lot, younger people in cities. Rather than they would diminish their state's clout as long as it meant that more of the Texans who counted were likely Republicans. Now, I don't know if that's going to be true or not, because I don't know how much thought really they're putting into this. They're making a lot of assumptions, but it's definitely true that they care more about their party than they do about the power of their state. And that's not how our country was designed. So it's one of the checks and balances that we don't always talk about, but this idea that states have their own self-interest. And ironically, Republicans talk about being the party of states' rights, state sovereignty. But when it comes to who are they governing for, they're governing on behalf of only certain people. And this is, of course, like a reflection of the way Trump governed, right? He was not thinking about how do I govern on behalf of everybody. Right. He was thinking about how do I govern on behalf of only the people who voted for me.
Yeah, and just to make that more specific, when you say govern, one of the most, I feel like, egregious examples of that is not helping people in blue states with COVID. Like there's so much that happened, but specifically, I feel like what's his face, Jared was involved in this. Like they made it harder for blue states to deal with COVID, and that technically is a form of governance, but it's also a deadly form of targeting. Done using politics.
But it's not just retribution, right? Because what they wanted was governors of blue states to praise Trump so that Trump was more likely to get reelected. And in exchange, they would give aid. And that was essentially what sometimes he said it explicitly, sometimes he said it implicitly. I mean, I just want to point out, like, obviously we dodged a bullet in the 2020 election, but is there any chance that if Trump had won, vaccine distribution to states would not be based on how publicly those states' governors praised Trump? Of course not. Vaccine distribution would have been entirely political. And so now what we're seeing is vaccines are being distributed to states because Americans live in those states, because we want people to get vaccinated. We want to save lives. And I do think, I just want to point out, that is popular, right? One of the reasons Biden is doing very well in his approval ratings right now is because most Americans, and that includes independents and Republicans, would like to see our leaders govern on behalf of everybody. So hopefully that's the best chance I think the system has to self-correct, is that politically not being a jerk turns out to be a popular thing.
And getting things done and providing people with access and opportunity to healthcare, education, employment, and seeing those things in your community. All the smart people I talked to, including you, just said it. That's how you win elections, by actually governing and getting real things that people can see done. And I mentioned this piece, but everybody, I'll link to it in the show notes. The Real Census News, the GOP's self-sabotage, so good. At democracydocket.com by my guest, David Litt, who is a great writer and researcher as well for this piece and everything else. I just have to ask you two more quick questions, one of which is about the Arizona fraudit. What do you think of what's happening in Arizona with this absolutely insane? You couldn't write it, and if you wrote it and you're a writer, no one would buy it. They would be like, there's no way they're looking for bamboo or watermarks or all this other stuff. And you're even seeing some of the crazy Republicans distancing themselves from this because of the bad press that it's getting. But what do you make of that whole thing and the potential outcome here?
What's scary about all of this, right, what we're seeing in Arizona is like nonsense layered upon nonsense. But the weird thing is, like, the people who are theoretically adults in charge are like, never mind, let's give the least responsible people, even in a party that has become increasingly irresponsible, like, let's give them the wheel and just see what happens. Right. And that's really scary, because there is this attitude. You saw it with Republicans and Trump. You saw it with Republicans when they were lying after the 2020 election of like, let's give the fringe the chance to shake its sillies out, and then eventually responsibility will prevail. And we have seen time and time and time again that the opposite happens. When you give people that power, they don't give it up. Then they say, okay, see, you've legitimized us. Now we want more control. And so, today's people who are like looking through ballots for bamboo or whatever the crazy conspiracy theory is, they're going to then turn around and put that on their resume and see, I'm an official auditor. How come you don't let me run the party in some other way? And so those are our future lawmakers. They're our future, delegates to conventions. So the audit itself doesn't worry me in the same way that, like, they could do a search for Bigfoot. They're not going to find Bigfoot. The thing that worries me is the handing over of power from a party that has already gotten pretty fringy to the fringes of the fringe and saying, what's the worst that could happen? Well, like, January 6th happened. A lot of bad stuff could happen.
I mean, I think that's all true, and I agree with it. But with the Bigfoot example, I kind of feel like they do find Bigfoot. I think they say often, "Look, we found Bigfoot," and every journalist's like, "Where?" Like, "We got him." Like, "No, we don't see him anywhere." Like, "We got Bigfoot," and that's that. I mean, that's what Trump did for years. He just said things. It'll just go away. COVID will just go away. And like, wait, what? No, it won't. Yeah, it will. It will. And that's just, it's taken as fact by a certain huge percentage, frighteningly large percentage of Americans.
Ironically, if Trump would just do a video in favor of vaccines, COVID probably would go away, and then he could claim credit, and he still won't do that because he's like too petty a person. But
it's not because he's a petty person. People keep saying that. Everybody keeps talking about if Trump only, he could have taken credit for the vaccine, he could have get credit for the vaccine, he would look good. But every time people make those kinds of criticisms and points, I'm always like, hold on a second. His entire life has always been to create a wedge, to create something divisive, conflict, to get ratings, to get views, to make money. He does it with his own businesses. He does it with his own family. And he's certainly did it with the country. He has no desire to get that kind of good credit. His only desire is to get clicks. And in this case, tease the idea that he might run again so people will pour money just to make money.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I was not suggesting that, this would like redeem Donald Trump.
No, I know, but I'm just saying
he's likely to do. No, I see what you're saying.
He needs a thing to raise money.
Well, and what's interesting is, right, this brings us back to the fraud. I like that term, and also the the broader big lie, right? Is like, I don't think that Trump sat down and thought, how do I imperil American democracy? I think it was very much, wait a second, there's no rule saying I can't just make stuff up all the time. Great, I'm going to do it, right? Like, I'm going to get, my followers are going to love this. People are going to donate hundreds of millions of dollars to my Stop the Steal campaign, and I'm going to completely waste it, right? This is, so the opportunism is way more operative here than like, an evil genius at work. But when it comes to the Arizona audit, I think you're raising a really good point, which is, and I think to the credit, we talked about mainstream journalists, I think they are not falling for this in quite the way they used to, although it's still, we have a long way to go. I think there is this idea of like the GOP erodes trust in our elections through fraudulent claims, and then says we need to restrict access to the vote because, look, none of our people trust the access, because none of our people trust elections. Well, it's like, they don't trust elections because you lied about election fraud. The way to get people to trust elections would be to stop lying, not to make elections harder. And they will never stop lying about elections until they feel confident that they can win elections without having to change their policies. So ultimately, this is not going to restore trust. That's an important point. This audit, even among people who are concerned about bamboo and ballots or whatever, they're never going to get to a point where they say, oh, yeah, OK, fine, you're right, we should trust the elections. They're only going to continue to erode trust in elections for as long as they possibly can.
Right. And that's my final question. And that's, I think, the most disconcerting conclusion or outcome of the big lie, which is a lot of people are saying that the future of elections doesn't matter for Republicans, because when they lose elections at any level, they're all going to just claim that it was rigged. And it just, the outcome of the election, democracy, voting, none of that matters, because they know the playbook right now is to hype that it's rigged. And then at the end, after they lose, no matter by how much, they'll simply say it was rigged. And that leads us to Liz Cheney having a shred of integrity by staying honest about the election. What does it mean that they're pushing her out? What is the larger, in your opinion, David Litt, conclusion of the future of the Republican Party? Some people are predicting its death right now, which I think is probably silly. It's just evolving into, an episode of Coast to Coast, a conspiracy show.
Yeah, I don't think that the Republican Party is going anywhere. I think the question is going to be, I think the Republican Party is dragging itself down. The question is going to be whether they drag the rest of America down with it. And we don't know the answer to that yet. But you now have kind of two wings of the party, right? People for whom democracy is a bad thing and we should be actively undermining and destroying democracy, and people who don't care about the people who are undermining and destroying democracy. Liz Cheney, and obviously there's many, many things about Liz Cheney that I do not agree with, including some of the, like, where she's been willing to draw the line on rule of law issues, right? She's not blameless here. But she represents a wing of the party that is no longer allowed to exist, which is, we can go very, very far, but we still need to fundamentally live in a democracy where elections decides who represent us, fair elections. And that's no longer allowed, right? You can be like Elise Stefanik, who's replaced her, is trying very hard not to explicitly endorse conspiracy theories, but basically say, let's look past all that stuff and let's just try to win back the House in 2022. You can sort of pretend, you can put your head in the sand and pretend you don't notice, or kind of tease stuff, but not go all the way. But you can't stand up to the conspiracy theorists. The conspiracy theorists, they are now capable of taking down the party. And that's the issue, right? There's a lot of Republicans, I think, who are saying, well, how are we going to win elections without the conspiracy theory wing of our party? And the answer is, like, if that's the only way to win elections, you should think about maybe you should lose some elections, right? And figure out a way to come back. But that's where we're at.
And you've written so much about why such a minority of Americans, many of which are absolute lunatics and conspiracy theorists, have so much power. And that is one of my favorite things about all of your writing in terms of civics and history and the Constitution, which is why you should go get David's books. But also, I'd love to see more from you on media criticism. This conversation today, I think, was really enlightening to hear your thoughts about it. So I hope that you'll think a little bit more about that. I know maybe you haven't in the past thought it's your wheelhouse, but maybe it could be, because I love hearing what you're saying, and I love what you did on Newsmax, and I think there's a lot of problems, and it helps people understand where they should get their information from when talking to someone like yourself. in my opinion.
Well, I think you may be right. So we'll see.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll think about it.
Thank you, sir. Really appreciate your time. I always learn a lot talking to you.
Yes, always good to talk to you. All right, thanks, Pete.
All right, there he goes. David Litt, that is on Twitter, David Litt. Please, right now, go tell him that you enjoyed him on this show. He's always good to join me, and I love talking to him. That was a great thing that he did, and he's always writing very insightful, enlightening, informative articles in all kinds of different big media outlets, and you should definitely get his books. They are so good, so interesting, and important. Great guy, too. Really nice guy. And I like him a lot. All right, and now I want to introduce you to a new guest who has not been on this program before, but comes highly recommended. She is running for mayor in the town of Buffalo, New York, the city, I should say, of Buffalo, New York, where she was born and raised. She had her first son when she was 14 years old, then later twins when she was 19, yet still graduated high school, put herself through school, became a nurse, became a community organizer, and now is running for mayor. I was so blown away and impressed with her resume and her life, and more importantly, just getting to talk to her. Honestly, my hope after this interview is that you'll send her a few bucks and help her win in Buffalo. I think that'll, electing women like her, I think matters a great, great deal. Her website is IndiaWalton.com, and here we go. Very, very excited to welcome India Walton to the podcast. She comes highly recommended, and then I read all about you, and I'm super impressed with your life, and specifically, of course, with your campaign for Buffalo mayor. And when I tell you that I'm from Syracuse, I grew up in Syracuse, what generalizations would you make, would you like to say about CNY? Because you're Western New York, right?
Well, first, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. I never miss a chance to grab the mic and have a platform to speak. I think that the most general thing is that since I've been in touch with people from downstate a lot during this campaign, a lot of my support is statewide, that everything outside of the city is upstate. So while I think I am a Western New Yorker and you think you are a Central New Yorker, when you speak to folks from New York City, we're actually all upstaters.
Well, yeah, I should be clear. I moved from Syracuse. I went to college in Cobleskill, which is a little town near Albany. And then I moved to New York City, where I lived for 12 years. And now I live in the burbs because we went and started a family. So I know exactly what you're talking about with the terminology. But upstate or Western New York is what we're talking about. You are running for mayor of Buffalo, where, of course, you grew up there. And I would love to just learn a little bit about you and your childhood and your life before we get into the really important issues that you're advocating and been fighting for a long time. So you come from a big family. What was your childhood memories? What was it like growing up there in Buffalo? Was it good? Was it bad? What was it like?
It was good. It was good, but it was tough. And because I am one of 6 children, I'm the eldest girl. I've always been sort of the caretaker of my siblings and my family. My mom worked a lot. She was a pharmacy tech at the VA hospital and then went on to get her nursing degree. But, I've been a fighter my whole life. I've never been a person to shy away from a challenge or a conflict. I tend to take things head on, and I was that way as a child as well.
What are the kind of the things that you identify most with, being from a big family, being Black, being a woman, any other experiences that, I can't see just by looking at you or reading about you that really shaped you as a person?
Mm-hmm. I think all of those things. And I think just being a caregiver and a nurse. And not only am I a mother, but I became a mother at 14. So when we talk about average people doing extraordinary things, I think that I embody the sense of resilience that a lot of Buffalonians are so proud of, is that we don't always have it easy, but somehow we come out of messy and sometimes problematic situations on top. And I think that this race is another indicator of the scrappy nature of this blue collar city.
I always think that's the best quality for politicians. You know, you don't want anybody to have a horrible childhood or tremendous adversity to overcome. But if they did, you kind of look at that and say, well, this person knows how to navigate tough situations. This is the type of person that can also relate to others who are dealing with similar situations. This is the type of person that I think should be a leader. And, you know, you mentioned having your son, was it, at 14? You got pregnant at 14? I just interviewed Nicole Lynn Lewis, who wrote this book, Pregnant Girl, which is fascinating and really helped me understand. It's funny, you know, just serendipitously, because now talking to you, because she writes her nonprofit, I think it's Generation Hope, talks about, you know, when women, teenage pregnancy, and advocating for those women to still get an education, which is exactly what you did. So take me through, you know, that experience for you and how that clearly defined you a great deal. 14, pregnant, and yet you still want to go to college? Get done with high school, I should say.
Yeah, 14 and pregnant. My oldest son, he's 24 years old now, but he has sickle cell disease. So he has a chronic illness that I also managed. He was in and out of the hospital a lot when he was a baby. I dropped out of high school to work full time to support my family because I didn't want to be dependent on social services. At 19, I became pregnant with twins with my husband at the time, and they were born at 24 weeks gestation. They were 1 pound 7 ounces and 1 pound 8 ounces. So now I have 3 children with special needs. But my experience with them being born prematurely and spending 6 months in the hospital is what inspired me to become a nurse. My experience, though I am so grateful for the care that they received, a lot of times I didn't appreciate the way that I was being spoken to or the way that I was treated. And I wanted to be a nurse to make sure that other young mothers who are going through these traumatic experiences have someone that they can identify with who really is going to advocate for them and their children and communicate in a way that is accessible and understandable.
Yeah, you're explaining an issue that has actually a lot of data to it that I've learned about. My friend Bakari Sellers writes about this in his book about his wife giving birth to their daughter. And what I'm talking about is Black folks who are patients wanting caregivers who are also Black, and white people might think, well, what's that about? Well, there's a tremendous amount of data and statistics in terms of care that Black women often, Black patients specifically, but Black women, I'm talking about pregnancy, often do not get. And it's not just, what I'm trying to say is I'm illustrating what your experience is. It's not just a feeling. There's actually data to it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Infant and maternal mortality in the Black community, we know that the disparities are very stark. And a lot of my platform and the work that I do in general really focuses on health equity and social determinants of health. So my nursing background makes me understand the issues through an intersectional lens, knowing that in order to reduce infant and maternal mortality, people don't only need access to better affordable health care, but we're talking about food, environmental justice, clean air and water, stable, affordable housing. We know that when mothers are housed in stable, healthy housing, that they are more likely to seek prenatal care. And when you have culturally competent care, you're more likely to have a relationship with your provider than you are, you know, if you walk into a facility where you don't feel welcome.
It's so true. And I just heard a podcast yesterday where this is true of all folks. I don't think I've ever heard the phrase culturally competent care, but to relate to, say, some white conservative anti-vaxxers. I just heard this podcast in the New York Times yesterday where basically these white folks in their 70s, they didn't want to get the vaccine, but they illustrated how their local doctor had done so well to build trust and to not condescend to them and to answer all their questions. And that's what they needed. It's culturally competent for them to have somebody that they trust. It's true, I'm saying, of all cultures. And it's sad, but true. And I probably always be that way. Just people that can understand and relate to you. Why did you want to become a nurse? What was the spark? Was that because you might have touched on that of your pregnancy when you were 14 and the experience you had or didn't have? Why did you want to go become a nurse?
I wanted to become a nurse because of my twins. I spent 6 whole months going back and forth to Children's Hospital in a very scary environment. I don't think that a lot of people don't know that every child is not born and goes straight home with the family. There are some children who stay in the hospital for a long time and have very complex medical issues. And a lot of what was going on with my children, the twins, when they were born, was not something that was easily understood. And I was approached one day by a physician who said, you know what, you should just give up. It's hopeless. They're never going to walk, never going to talk. Well, I believe in nurture over nature. So I know that a lot of our woes can be fixed with deep care and love. So I wrote it out, and now my twins are 19 years old. But it was that experience, not seeing someone who looked like me, not feeling like I was a part of the interdisciplinary team that was caring for my own children. I wanted to make sure that I could, go back there and reassure mothers that it's okay to be Black. It's okay to be a mom. It's okay to not have all the answers, but we are here to work together.
You must, you'll be a great mayor, I'm sure, but you must be a great nurse. And I wonder if that's challenging to consider leaving that behind, because based on your ability to relate to so many different kinds of women, patients in general, it must have been really rewarding to be able to do that every day. Is it hard to think about leaving that behind?
Well, so I left nursing in 2016 to become a community organizer. And what wound up happening was I spent a few years working in the Buffalo Public Schools as a nurse. And, though I love nursing and I really enjoy it, it was painful to me to be able to only have such a limited impact. And I was really wanting to have impact on a broader scale. I became interested in policy and legislation and things like that. And my foray into learning more about policy was as a community organizer, where I worked on police accountability, transparency, criminal legal reform, and the statewide campaign to legalize adult use cannabis.
Was there an issue, an incident, an experience that was the catalyst, or was it a bunch of things that made you want to leave nursing, a job I'm sure you loved and we can talk more about for sure as it relates to healthcare and the healthcare of folks in Buffalo? But was there something that made you want to go into community organizing? And then if you want to answer in this, were there any wins? Did you have any wins there?
Oh, yeah.
Good.
So children would come to the nurse's office, and they weren't coming to see me because they were sick. They were coming to me because they were hungry, they were tired. We had children who were chronically absent and late. And then upon further investigation, it was because they didn't have alarm clocks, or because their caregiver worked overnight, so they couldn't make it to school on time because they were caring for a younger sibling. And this was a grammar school. These are kids who are all under the age of 14, 15 years old. And one thing in particular stood out. There was a group of sisters. It was 3 of them, and they had lice. So I called the mom, and lice is a normal childhood occurrence in school.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. I think every school, my kids' school had it.
So I called the mom and I say, you have to pick them up and you shampoo them real good. Bring them back tomorrow. I'll check their head and they'll be good to go. Well, it was a Tuesday. And she said, okay, well, they'll be back on Monday because I can't buy the shampoo until I get paid on Friday. And these girls were going to miss 3 days of school because their mom couldn't afford lice shampoo. And the system of childhood poverty and concentrated disadvantage in Buffalo has gotten so bad. I just knew that I needed to diversify my skill set so that I could start getting to the root causes of a lot of these issues. Now, back on to wins. This year, for whatever reason, call it the pandemic, call it the scandal that's happening in Albany, but we saw the passage of the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. We saw bail reform passed a couple years ago. We saw an end to solitary confinement. That is the work that I did as an organizer. But, being in that environment allowed me to be able to establish relationships and networks with people all over the state and country.
That's amazing. And I'm so glad to hear that you got those wins. And yeah, a lot's changing in New York. Obviously, you mentioned the scandal. I don't know which one you're talking about because there's so many. But also the movement on weed is, I call it weed, sorry. But I mean, I make no secret that I use it and that I even grow it. And that's something I can say into a microphone and not have to worry about it, I think, because of just being, well, a white guy doesn't hurt. But I wonder if you know people who were arrested or, God forbid, served time for marijuana possession from your childhood. Was that something that you experienced?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, I made the assumption, but I didn't want to make the assumption. But it seems like it's just, what did you see? What did you experience in terms of like people you knew being arrested for cannabis, we call it now, possession?
It was a regular occurrence. And when I tell you I've had lots of issues to solve in my life, I'll give you a little story. I was on my way to Newburgh with my boyfriend at the time to visit his family for Easter. He had just got an Audi A6 and he was very proud of it. We were riding down to Newburgh and I had my son.
That's got to be about, I'm just doing the math. That's got to be about at least 4-hour drive from Buffalo to Newburgh.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Go ahead.
Yep. So I'm not a smoker. He was a consumer. He smokes. He had smoked in the car before we left Buffalo. Obviously, I'm not about to let this man smoke while my son is in the car. So we get pulled over by a state trooper on the suspicion that we were possessing marijuana.
It doesn't make any sense. It's usually just a certain type of person in a certain type of car is the reason to pull you over. But
there you go.
Is that right?
A certain type of person in a certain type of car.
Yeah.
They pulled me out of the car. They pulled my boyfriend out of the car. They searched all of our luggage. And then he searched how old was Mason? He might have been 6 or 7. He searched my 7-year-old son. And I said, you got to be kidding me. And he said, well, you have to understand that on this road, people are trafficking. I said, sir, I'm a registered nurse. And the work that I'm doing right now is to legalize marijuana in New York State. And what you're doing is wrong. So not only did I grow up with a lot of people who are denied access now to housing, education, decent jobs because of marijuana convictions for very small amounts, but I've experienced that type of profiling myself.
I mean, if I were you in that situation, or certainly now, I mean, the law has changed, but my answer to that would be like, you got to understand people are trafficking. I want to be like, so what? So what? Let them. What do you mean they're driving weed to somebody's house? Fine. Let them. My point though being is that the United States of America, sorry to rant here for a second, but we made that a crime. And then we punished people disproportionately. The whole thing is, Michelle Alexander, New Jim Crow. Read it if you haven't, folks. But I mean, that is where I got so much education. I mean, the idea that was even a crime is just horrendous. But things have changed going back to your wins in terms of cannabis laws in New York State and around the country. Let me just ask you to further along the conversation and talk about your candidacy and the issues. How much do you see, because, people are listening to this podcast from all over the country and world, I think, how much do you see the problems in Buffalo and in other cities and communities around the country? And pick anything you want to talk about what's broken and how it needs to be fixed. And, it's probably not, sadly, unique, or not necessarily, sadly, to your town, to Buffalo.
Mm-hmm. I think that for a long time, we've been told that Buffalo didn't suffer from problems of larger communities. Everything from, other people call it gentrification. I've begun saying the negative impacts of neighborhood change, because neighborhoods are going to change. But we can have an improvement in the standard of living for all people, and no one should be left out of that process. So whether it's gentrification, whether it's police reform and police brutality, whether it's lack of access to food, these problems with health disparities, we've been told that these are not Buffalo issues, but they are. And I'm very proud that I have been at the forefront of changing a lot of these conversations and being able to have honest discussions and work with community members to problem solve, right? I co-founded and led a community land trust in Buffalo, the first successful one, where we built permanently affordable housing in the Fruit Belt neighborhood in Buffalo that is feeling a lot of pressure from this medical campus that was the result of the Buffalo Billion. But, you know, all of the investment went into these large institutions and none got down to the neighborhood level. So I think that the overarching thing that we see all over the country is that people who work are tired of bearing the brunt for the ultra wealthy and people who are already well enough off that they don't have much to worry about. And we're tired of our public resources going to subsidize large corporations and leaving communities behind.
You know, I have this impression based on just paying attention to stuff and talking to people that there's something really interesting happen. In spite of this blatant racism and white supremacy that we've seen just dominate in so many different places, in spite of that, what I'm also seeing is Black folks organizing in a way that they never have, I want to say, been able to before, because I don't want to disparage, you know, earlier generations of Black folks who did amazing things. But it seems like what's happening right now and your, you know, even aspiration and ability to run has to do with Black folks taking power in a way that they haven't either been able to or for any other reason done in the past. Is there any truth to what I'm saying about what's happening in Buffalo and around the nation in terms of Black folks just saying, you know, we can do this ourselves now, and let's organize and let's lead and let's find the resources that we need? Is that happening? Am I just kind of making shit up about history? Forgive my language. Sorry, I forgot who I was talking to.
I believe it is happening. And I think that the thing that is special about this moment in history is that there is a diffuse movement with lots of people being elevated into leadership positions and learning the skills to organize, where in the past we've had, you know, single charismatic leaders who have this fall from grace, and there's not infrastructure left to support the movement moving forward. And a lot of what we're doing is the intentional building and relationships and network and infrastructure and scaffolding to support a sustained movement. I'm, you know, talking to my volunteers. We've recruited more than 400 volunteers for this campaign, but it's not about India Walton becoming mayor of Buffalo per se. We're going to win, but what happens after that? We want to challenge school board seats. We want to challenge common council seats. We want people on boards and commissions and you know, we want our people in the position to create change. And we're doing it in a way that we are not trying to be a duplicate of the current structure, right? So we don't want to just become the oppressor. We want to change the way governance happens in the city of Buffalo and all over the country.
It's what you're saying. I don't want to try to translate what you're saying and get it wrong, but it's clearly a major change within the Black community and organizing and then getting behind someone like yourself who has had, I feel like your life story is just atypical of people who run for office for a lot of obvious reasons. Why would you run for office? How could you even get to that point where you would? And yet here you are, and there are a lot of others around the country like you. And so it's super inspiring. India Walton, in case you need a reminder, is a Democrat. She's running for mayor in Buffalo. But right now, the mayor is a Democrat. Right now, it's also a Black man. He's been there since I read like 2005. He's running for his 5th term. So what are you saying about his leadership? Why are you challenging Byron Brown, Mayor Brown?
I am challenging Mayor Brown, number one, because I can. You can, as you can imagine, a person who's been in power as long as he has a lot of allegiances and loyalty. And there are people who are afraid of retribution, people who just won't challenge him because he holds the purse strings. He's the leader of the 2nd largest city in the state of New York. Because I'm a registered nurse, because I'm an affordable housing developer, a nonprofit executive, and organizer, I can work anywhere in the world and I'll be okay. So I don't have to depend on this office for a job, right? I'm there. I'm doing this to make change for my community. 16 years, we're seeing an ever increasing police budget, but crime is not down. We have the 3rd worst childhood poverty rate of any city this size in the country. Health disparities are horrible. We have this affordable housing crisis that existed before the pandemic that's only been exacerbated. And once that moratorium on evictions and foreclosures is lifted, we are looking at an unprecedented amount of people being put out on the streets, and nothing is being done about it. You know, we have a budget that's been proposed for the next fiscal year with zero engagement from community members and experts, policy experts who problem solve for a living.
And that's usually a red flag that the government is giving money not to the right places and to their friends. You know, it's usually I don't know anything about what this. I'm not casting any assumptions, but that's usually the case. I guess I am casting assumptions, but yeah, I hear what you're saying, and that seems really problematic, obviously. So that's why you're running, and that's why hopefully you're gonna win. But you know, what do you say to, in terms of policy solutions, what would be something that you would really, that you know, based on, again, your own personal experience and working as a nurse and a community organizer, that this government policy would be a game changer for folks in Buffalo who are struggling, who are, you know, really just searching for opportunities? What kind of policies are we talking about passing and making realistic, India?
Sure. We are talking about.
I know you could talk about this for an hour, so you know, pick whatever you want.
I could.
I know.
Much of my platform really focuses on attempts to eliminate poverty as a means to increasing public safety and the overall health of our community. There's $350 million slated to come into Buffalo from the federal government. And that may seem insignificant to people who live in larger cities, but for a place like Buffalo, that's quite a bit of money. And because we've left the majority of people out of the decision-making and governance process, we've not seen any improvement in the condition of our community in many ways. So I think the number one policy that is going to drive an improvement in the lives of people is just putting people first, doing the things that we know people need, expanding youth employment, opening our community centers, putting investments in neighborhoods, and engaging people on a level and encouraging co-governance. This is our city for all of us. And, you know, I can't tell a neighborhood what is best for them. They have to tell me. So we need to work together. So I think that, you know, just putting people first, being honest, transparent, and accessible is going to be the policy that really is going to be what is most different from the current administration.
You started by saying eliminating poverty. I mean, overall, if I were to shorten everything you just said, those would be the two words that I would pull out, because those are that is the solution for basically everything. If you eliminate poverty, you don't have nearly as much crime. You don't have nearly the lack of opportunity for healthcare, for, you know, as you can talk about, you know, healthy food in your area. But I do want to, you know, I want to get your take on the strongly held belief, and this is not only conservative white people. Let's be clear. It's most conservative white people, but it's a lot of people, that folks who are on the lower end of the income ladder, who are poor, who are living in poverty, are there because they've made bad choices and because they're lazy. And to a large extent, of course, that is how the Black community has been painted for years in media and from politicians. You know, certainly we could talk about that forever. But you already mentioned something, you know, at the beginning of our conversation, which was when you got pregnant when you were 14, you didn't want to go on government assistance. You wanted to go to work. And that is the truth, really. I mean, and my brief anecdote is, if you really want to know who works hard, ride the subway or go down public transportation in the middle of the night. And I used to go into to work really early, and I'd be on that train, and you wouldn't see any white people. It was brown and Black people who were working the tough jobs in the middle of the night. They're all working. This idea that they're lazy or that they've made bad choices, how do you combat that with an anecdote, much less a policy? Because to me, that's the most pernicious, dangerous, strongly, widely held belief, not only amongst white conservatives, but a lot of Americans, that You're poor because you made bad choices and you just want to live off government assistance.
Yeah. The blessing of this pandemic has proven that we can give people free healthcare. Everyone's getting the COVID shot for free. We can give people money. It's not going to make them stop working. Contrary to what's being said about, people not being able to find workers because everyone's getting unemployment. Yeah. It's not that. Raise the wage. Like you said, poor people are some of the hardest working people in this country, working 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet. And we have to stop perpetuating the lie of rugged individualism. We are human beings who thrive when we live in community. And, I think that the most important thing that I can do besides make policies that prioritize working families is use my influence as the mayor, the first woman mayor of the second largest city in New York State, to change the narrative, right? When you run, the first thing your team says is, well, what are the skeletons? What are the hit pieces that they're going to come out with? Yeah. Well, guess what? There isn't any. I have nothing to hide. Yeah, I'm a high school dropout and I'm also a college graduate.
Did you ever pay, I'll put you on the spot, a porn star for sex?
I've never.
All right. Well, okay, just checking. I have to check now because America has regressed a little bit. I wish there were like
have you seen me? Do you think that I would be paying for sex?
I don't even know what that means. I'm not sure to laugh at that or be offended by your own self-deprecation.
Maybe I should, let me stand up. I'm a little rough today and my lighting is bad, but I'm kind of fly, Pete.
Yeah, listen, I don't want to go down this road, India Walton, because I don't want to objectify you in any way. But I will say, before I even met you on video, I saw pictures and I thought, here's a very attractive woman, and being attractive does not hurt when you're running for office. I think it's important. I think ugly people have a harder time running for office, frankly. I do. But yet we disprove that all the time if you've seen the Republican Senate. So getting back to, this pernicious myth, I mean, is there any way that, well, let me just move along the conversation and say, because I think one of the hardest challenges that I've heard, I don't know this for a fact, but is when you're running for office right now, you're trying to reach out and connect with folks who have had similar experiences, certainly with folks living in impoverished parts of Buffalo, which is sadly a huge part of Buffalo. And you're trying to get them to care about what you have to say and what you're doing. And you couldn't blame anybody, especially minority folks living in poor communities, say the system's broken, to believe in some weird conspiracies sometimes, but simply to not want to be involved. How are you getting people that have been, I'm going to go ahead and make another assumption, disenfranchised in your community to care about India Walton's campaign being different than anything else they've ever seen? Mm-hmm. Is that a fair question? Is that experience
it is.
You're having?
It is. And I will start by saying that the system is not broken. It's functioning as it was intended to.
Fair enough.
This system is built on the premise of, hyper-capitalism, rugged individualism, and white supremacy. So we have to dispel that myth. But also, I think that my track record and my record of caring for people and stepping in and being the helper outside of running for office, when people have an issue, no matter what it is, from housing to escaping domestic violence to looking for a new physician for their child, they call or email me. And if I don't have the answer, I can connect them with someone who can help them out. So I think that just being a community connector and a helper is my reputation. And I think that we have a once in a lifetime opportunity to change the face of politics in Buffalo and make it for, of, and by the people. And really just send a message that enough is enough. And we're not going to take this laying down anymore.
Well, let me be more specific with the question. I'm glad you pushed back on the broken system thing. I think that's a great point. However, though, you do have to convince some people that it's not broken. It's being implemented. It's working just the way it was designed. But more specifically, who have you turned? Who have you talked to in your community that you've changed their mind to care about this campaign when they didn't care about others? Is there a specific story, anecdote, person that you've converted, as a community organizer, much less as a candidate for mayor?
Yeah, I can talk about a person that I spoke with today. I won't say their name, but they are an elected official. And when the conversation began, it was more concerns about my lack of government experience. And I began to talk about how successful the current person is with all of their years of experience. And we're not seeing any improvement in our community. And I have so many skills that are transferable on so many levels. But the most important thing is just my ability to work with and resonate with other people, not having to be the person with all the answers, but having enough curiosity, vision, and being bold enough to try something different.
One of the things that I found is so upsetting to me is when, let me just say it this way, sorry, but when white people take great Black ideas, things, and words and destroy them. And I'm not talking about like music or culture, because it's not always destroyed. It's often just stolen and they add to it their own flair. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like the word woke or social justice. And specifically, I want to ask you about community organizing, because Barack Obama, that was an asset up until people found out that he was a community organizer. Community organizing is so important. It's heroic. It's pure in so many ways, and it's where change begins. But because Barack Obama was, after Harvard Law School for a stint, a community organizer, because probably he thought that would be good for his politics. Same reason he went to the Black church that he didn't go to win people over, because he's a politician. But in your case, I think, you did it for, probably a lot more pure reasons to create change when you left nursing. But just talk to me about, that's become a bad word. Like, community organizing has become a damaged idea when in fact it's the most important type of organizing. What is it? What did you do, and why does it matter?
Yes. In my belief, community organizing is about relationships, and it's about authentic relationships. And there are a few different, schools of thought on organizing, sure, where a lot of people, will look for your self-interest and want to use that to kind of exploit and extract from you. But I come from the school of thought that everyone has something to offer. Every person is valuable. There's no individual that's insignificant. And it is a very time-consuming process to really get to know someone and learn about them without asking them to do something. But really being able to support the leadership of others. That is what community organizing is to me. It is creating more organizers. My mentor and my boss at my first organizing job said, your job is to organize yourself out of a job. You shouldn't be the one on the microphone. You shouldn't be the one writing the news articles. Your job is to help others obtain the skills, the courage and confidence and knowledge to do those things. So now when the news is calling for a comment, oh, you know what? Call my homeboy Reggie. He went with me on several trips to Albany. He knows, right? So that is what organizing is, and why that matters is because you are able to establish networks, right? What people who do well have over a lot of people who don't is information, right? You're giving paid internships to your friend's child who was underqualified, but because I don't know someone who can create that opportunity for my son, he doesn't get it. So, all of those things is why community organizing works. And it's also why I can be a formidable opponent to a 16-year incumbent, because I'm able to organize more than 400 volunteers in my campaign. And even without being wealthy or taking money from developers, I can raise $100,000 because I've established this intricate network of supporters from all over the country.
You're not doing this to get rich?
No. If I wanted to be wealthy, you know what I would do?
What?
I would go be a nurse.
That was good money?
It was excellent money. Excellent money, union job, full benefits.
I love what you said. Instead of what?
Oh, I was going to say, instead of taking this weird vow of poverty. So
I thought about
dedicate all of my time to running.
Yeah, I thought about running for office for about a minute and a half when I left my corporate media job, and then I looked at what my wife, frankly, looked at what it would mean for us. She was like, what are you gonna do? How are we gonna pay our mortgage? You don't get paid. And I was like, yeah, and I couldn't do it. So I think that's the one of the biggest barriers to working in government, to running for office is that how are you supposed to pay for your kids' health care? And right. You are the person we want to be running for office, but yet you can't run for office because you got to take care of your family. And it's like, so that means it leaves people who have, generational wealth or just, made a bunch of money. And they're not looking out for the people that matter. Sorry for talking so much now and the whole time. Last question for you, which is, how have you, what should white folks do? How do you see white people that are on your team, media and politics that want to support, what you're doing, your experience and get behind you? I mean, I've done my best to listen. And obviously I've already talked too much, but and by the way, is that a fair question? Is that an annoying question? What can white folks do to support your agenda?
I don't think that is, an inappropriate question at all. And I don't get annoyed by, and I know some people do, right? There's this whole thing about the emotional labor that it takes to explain things, but I don't mind, because I think that in order for us to have true allyship and true friendship, we have to come to a level of understanding. We don't have to agree on every single thing, but at least to be able to understand another person's perspective. So I'm really big on allyship and just honoring relationships and being a person who is more than willing to meet people where they are. My own political analysis has evolved and continues to evolve on a day-to-day basis. So I don't expect people to come in with all the answers. I think that what, white people can do is sacrifice some of your privilege. When there's an opportunity or a connection that can be made, do that and open up your wallet, donate to worthy causes. One of them is India Walton for Buffalo Mayor at www.indiawalton.com. Make a donation that, no amount is too small, but the max contribution in New York State for this election is $5,200. But, those are things, and you just be honest and real. And, when you have questions, ask, listen, and be patient and gracious with one another.
Yeah, well, I've made a good living out of asking ignorant questions. So it's not really for me. It's for other people to kind of understand, what we can do and what our role is. I think it's a really important question to ask. And I also don't blame black folks for being exhausted to have to explain it. But so I appreciate that very much. India Walton for mayor, a great person to support. So great to talk to you. I hope that we can talk again, and maybe someday I'll be able to get up there and meet you in person. And best of luck and stay in touch. And I really appreciate it, India. I learned a lot talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There will be a victory party for you to attend at the end of June. So be on the lookout for that.
Awesome. Congrats ahead of time. Looking forward to it.
Thanks.
Well, how about that? India Walton, introducing India Walton. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. I really learned a lot that was wide-ranging, super fascinating, and I think very important, which is what I'm trying to do each and every day on this podcast. Thank you to both my guests, David Litt and India Walton. I hope that you'll consider tossing her a couple bucks. Go to her website and let her know that you heard her here on the program as well. All the information for that is in today's show notes. If you're not already supporting this podcast with a paid subscription, that'd be amazing if you did. Can't do it without you. While it is free, it ain't cheap. So please check out the paid subscription link in the show notes and send me a couple bucks a month if you're enjoying the work that me and my fake producer Keith are doing each and every day. And if you want to join Team Stand Up about how to develop the program and the community around it, send me an email, standupwithpete@gmail.com, and the subject, Team Stand Up, and I'll invite you to a very special Zoom. And I hope to see you at the Stand Up Community Hangout, Happy Hour Hangout. That's tomorrow night. Right here on what? What was I going to say? On the internet. Hang out with me and a whole bunch of my friends and listeners and subscribers and supporters and folks who are on the journey along with me. Speaking of which, John Carroll is a singer and songwriter, Grammy Award winner, and just an all-around great guy. He wrote this song for this show, and we love him for it. Take it away, John Carroll.
You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get foot down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up.